Storytelling isn't anything new. Heck, as I said in a video just last week, you can go back centuries to observe how stories have evolved into their modern form. Even whole civilizations centered their religions around complex storytelling, such as the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, and among many others. And what's really impressive is that, stripped of their religious connotations, of course, a lot of these stories actually stand the test of time pretty well and have even served as the foundation for some of the most popular books and movies out there. But that being said, when it comes to trying to tell these old stories as they were to a modern generation, there is a way to do it very effectively without losing the spirit of those original stories in the process. And today I'd like to go over one particular movie that I believe did a very good job at this, with that being the 1981 movie Clash of the Titans. But before we go any further, I would just like to warn all of you that there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So if you don't want anything ruined, I highly suggest you click off the video and come back to it at a later date. And this will be your only warning. And just to make myself perfectly clear, I will only be referring to the 1981 original movie in this video, and that nothing from the 2010 remake exclusively will be brought up here. Alright, so with that out of the way, Clash of the Titans is a modern retelling of the old Greek myth surrounding the legendary hero Perseus, the demigod and son of Zeus, as he fights many obstacles for the hand of the princess Andromeda. Now, the one thing this movie doesn't get quite as right as it could have been is its accuracy to the original myths. But other than that, this movie manages to take a story originally told in ancient Greece and modernizes it surprisingly well, while keeping the essence of the story intact. And let me demonstrate how it did that, starting with Perseus himself. Now, it may surprise many to learn that in the original Greek myth, a hero wasn't always defined by the good deeds he did for others. Instead, they were simply defined as anybody who did things in the name of the gods. As a result, certain Greek heroes were actually pretty selfish jerks that never did anything all that noble, though this doesn't apply so much to Perseus himself. But regardless, the point is that they wouldn't always be the best fit for the main character of an epic fantasy made today, especially if you wanted them to be a role model. But in the movie, Perseus is made out to be a tried and true hero. He's noble to a fault, does the right thing simply because he's a compassionate man trying to prove his worth, and will travel to the literal edge of the underworld to save the woman he loves. In other words, he's a man you can really root for and want to see succeed, making him the perfect lead for a movie like this. And this extends to the other characters as well. In the original myth, Andromeda is a woman Perseus just so happens to save and then wins her hand in marriage. But here the relationship is given more focus, though it still happens a little fast. But considering this is a retelling of Greek myths, the audience is more inclined to accept that anyway. And as for Andromeda herself, though she's not fighting in battles or anything like that, she's shown several times to firmly stand her ground and is just as compassionate as Perseus is, making it clear that she is his equal. Heck, even when about to be eaten by a sea monster, a fate she accepts willingly, by the way, she doesn't even scream. So, simply put, she's not there just to be a damsel in distress, and is far more than that. And there's also a mentor figure are common to Greek myths in the form of the playwright Amen, who manages to be both funny and rather helpful. And honestly, I think his inclusion was rather clever, as it allows for a Greek historian-like character to exist within the time period the myths are set in themselves without it feeling weird or awkward. And there's also a clockwork owl who provides plenty of comic relief, but also manages to be perhaps the most productive character in the entire movie besides Perseus himself. Seriously, I don't know if you'll ever see a comic relief character have a more important part in the plot. And even the captain of the guard, who barely gets any focus, manages to be surprisingly helpful and even arouses genuine sadness in both Perseus and the audience when he's killed. And let's not forget the movie's villain, Calibus. And let me just say, for a character that wasn't even in the myths and created solely for the movie, he fits into the setting perfectly. His tragic yet monstrous portrayal, his appearance, his personality, everything about him feels as if he belongs squarely in a Greek myth. And the same goes for quite a few other creatures as well. As this movie had the legendary Ray Harryhausen attached to it, it was a given that a lot of creatures would appear. But whether they actually were in the Perseus myth or not, they're integrated into the story here perfectly. Everything from Pegasus to the giant vulture to even the Kraken itself. And really, I don't see a problem with that last change in particular, as at the end of the day, a sea monster is a sea monster, no matter what it's called or what it looks like. Though you have to admit, Harryhausen does make it look pretty darn impressive. And even the other creatures, such as the witches, they're perfectly portrayed as both all-knowingly helpful, yet extremely dangerous in their craving for flesh at the same time. And yet, somehow they don't evoke the disgust of cannibalism. Though, let's face it, these witches are not exactly human either. And finally, there's Medusa. Now, unlike in the myth, she actually puts up a fight, and it's absolutely glorious to see, both in terms of stop motion and as an action scene. This was one of the best additions they made. I mean, this movie turned her from an obscure Gorgon into a famous Greek monster for a reason. And last, but certainly not least, there's how the Greek gods themselves are portrayed. I mean, who knew Maggie Smith could be so genuinely terrifying? Seriously, when her character is angry, watch out. She most certainly has the wrath of a Greek goddess, alright. But in the end, it's Zeus who runs away with it, being portrayed only by an actor worthy of his caliber, Laurence Olivier. And while his womanizing from the myths is most definitely discussed and on display, on the whole, he's actually one of the better gods in the movie. He's depicted as an almost friendly old man with a bit of a temper, but who only directs it at those who deserve it. Basically, he's a mostly wise leader, and both his fellow gods and human worshippers could do a lot worse. And honestly, I think that was the best way to portray him, especially because he is on Perseus' side the whole way through, given that he is his son and all, while at the same time keeping him sympathetic. And on that topic, there's one specific scene towards the end that I felt was done particularly well in modernizing the story involving Zeus. Now, for those of you who don't know, in a lot of ancient Greek stories, the gods would show up at random points and decide the fate of certain characters, sometimes changing the whole course of the story by either saving them or making things even worse. And this would happen even if the gods in question had not previously been a part of the story at all. There were even a few extreme cases where the main character would go through a perilous journey, risk his life many times, and about to be slaughtered when a god, who again might not have even been mentioned previously, comes out of nowhere and saves them simply because that god says it's not their time to die, they must survive and fulfill their destiny. Now, from a modern storytelling perspective, this would be considered a cop-out in its purest form. But back then, because these stories were just as much about the gods as mortals, having a god randomly come in to save the day was not only cool, but something that was almost expected. The gods always had a large omnipresence in those stories and could interfere at a moment's notice if they so chose. But the fact still remains that it doesn't exactly make for a good story from a modern perspective if the gods are constantly interfering and affecting the outcome incessantly, because then it makes it look like the characters have no agency of their own. And on top of that, the idea of gods coming in at the last second to save the day for no reason is where the phrase Deus ex machina actually comes from. And if you've never heard that before, a deus ex machina is when something randomly appears in a story with no foreshadowing at a crucial moment to let the heroes save the day. And though I think that phrase is a little overused these days, it's nonetheless really looked down upon and something writers usually go out of their way to avoid. So, to get back to the scene in question, this movie very cleverly has Zeus save the heroes at the climax without him coming down from Mount Olympus and doing so himself and robbing Perseus of the victory he had earned. Because Perseus must get the head of Medusa to Andromeda so he can stop the Kraken from killing her, but collapses from absolute exhaustion, which is understandable considering all he's been through, before he can get there. With all hope seemingly lost, Zeus secretly restores Perseus' strength, and this is what allows him to show up in time to stop the Kraken and save Andromeda. So while it is Perseus himself who gets to save the day, if Zeus hadn't given him the extra boost when he needed it at the crucial moment, he wouldn't have been able to. In other words, this perfectly solves the dilemma of letting the movie be Perseus' story, while at the same time letting the gods interfere like they did in the myths. Because here, Zeus only gives Perseus the chance to stop the Kraken. He doesn't do it himself, and his interference doesn't guarantee victory. But at the same time, Perseus wouldn't have been able to defeat it without him either. Alright, so simply put, if you're going to take an ancient or classical story and try to tell it to a modern audience, this movie's format is definitely the way to go about doing it. It's not afraid to make changes or have the characters reflect slightly more on modern values than ancient ones, but at the same time still stays completely true to the feeling behind those stories. Like I just said, they even managed to pull off a deus ex machina in the story and have it actually work within the context of the narrative. And as a writer myself, let me just say, that alone is an amazing feat. Now sure, Clash of the Titans is by no means a perfect movie, but it is the perfect template for any writer on how a Greek myth should be updated for modern audiences to watch on screen. Okay, that's all I have to say on that. So now I want to hear what you guys think. Do you believe Clash of the Titans did an excellent job of updating its source material while staying true to the spirit of it? Or do you think it changes too much and that other movies have done it better? Please let me know in the comments below. And like always, you don't have to agree with me on this video. You can feel any way about this movie and how well it updated the story that you want to. And finally, Thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next